Welcome to another video lecture by Utkalp Digital Classes. I am your tutor Raghav Chaturvedi, and today we are going to look at the second part of wave optics, which will include topics such as the optical path length, interference due to thin films, diffraction focusing on single slits, and polarization and Malus law. Next, we look at the thickness of thin films. So when a glass plate of thickness T and refractive index mu is placed in front of the slit in the Young's double slit experiment, in one of the slits I placed it, then the central bright fringe will shift towards that side in which the glass plate is placed. So here the glass plate is placed towards the S1 side, so your central fringe will shift towards the S1 side. Okay, why is this so? Because the side in which the glass plate is placed will have an extra path difference, and to show this, in the path S1P, let's talk about the path S1P, this path. So in this path, the distance traveled by wave in air, so distance in air is how much? It is S1P minus T. And what is the distance traveled by wave in sheet? Distance. I'm doing these derivations because just giving the formulas will not help, because you should know how to do this, because in the actual questions they might either fill the entire system with a medium, or they might put both two types of thin films in front of both the lenses with different thickness and refractive indexes. So you should know how to approach these questions. Now what do? The time taken by light to reach up to a point P, time taken for it to reach P will be the same for both S1 and S2. So there should be no time lag between the waves that are reaching. Okay, so you need to equate the times. Okay, and when you do this, what do you get? This means that S2P divided by C, where the C is the velocity, is nothing but S1P minus T divided by C, okay, plus T. Here T is your thickness, okay, your T divided by C by mu, because C by mu is the velocity of light in that thin film. When you do this, I can easily write that S2P is nothing but S1P plus mu minus 1 into T. That implies S2P minus S1P is equal to mu minus 1 into T. What does this tell you? This is nothing but your path difference. So my path difference is nothing but mu minus 1 into T. Okay, which implies that my phase difference due to this path difference is nothing but 2 pi by lambda into mu minus 1 into T. So in order to find the distance of the shifted fringe from the central fringe, what do? Your distance of shifted fringe from the central fringe will be given as d to mu minus 1 into t divided by small d. Why is this so? Because xd by capital D was equal to mu minus 1 into t. This was the case for the central fringe. So I can write that my x can be written as beta times mu minus 1 t by lambda also, where beta is equal to d into lambda by small d. You can also have a question in which they ask you about the number of fringes displaced. So you have the number of fringes displaced, nothing but mu minus 1 into d by lambda. So the things that I want you to remember from here are, first of all, if similar questions are asked, first of all, this equation, what is the path difference? From the path difference you can easily calculate all the other values, and what are the number of fringes that are displaced. Okay, note that if a glass plate of refractive index mu1 and mu2 having same thickness t is placed in the path of the ray coming from S1 and S2, okay, if you have like two glass plates, then your path difference I'll just show you this condition. You have S1, you have S2, and you both have the same thickness, let's say T. This has mu1, this has mu2, and you've kept them like this. Okay, then your part difference will be nothing but d by d into mu1 minus mu2 into t. Okay, this should be clear every time. And distance of the displaced fringe from the central fringe will be equal to beta times mu1 minus mu2 p by lambda, where I know that beta by lambda is equal to d by d. Okay, but even if you remember this is quite sufficient. This will also work on the same logic. So if you just draw simple lines and then subtract them using the same principle, distance in air and then the distance in the distance traveled by the light in that medium of thickness t, and then you try to equate the times, you will get the answer. Let's look at the next question. In a double slit experiment, when a thin film of thickness t having a refractive index mu is introduced in front of one of the slits, the maximum at the center of the fringe pattern shifts by 1 fringe width. The value of t is, so you are given that there is a change equal to your fringe width, which is fringe width. Now what is the fringe width? My fringe width is nothing but d into lambda by d, small d. Okay, and this has to be equated to the shift in the path length, that is the the shift that is produced due to placing a film. So that is nothing but d into mu minus 1 into t divided by d. If I equate these two, I can easily write that t is nothing but lambda by mu minus 1. Next, let's look at the interference due to thin films. Before jumping into the topic, I'll talk to you about some of the key points, which I'll note them down here. So the first point says that whenever there is a reflection from the surface of a denser medium, so reflection from the surface of a denser medium, this will imply an additional phase difference of pi, or a path difference of lambda by 2 of lambda by 2. Okay, so whenever a reflection takes place from the surface of a denser medium, what this means is you have a surface separating two mediums, let's say mu1 and mu2. Okay, and if your light is coming in from mu1 where mu2 is greater than mu1, then whatever light is reflected back, that reflected light will have a extra phase of pi. Okay, but note that when reflection is taken from a surface of a rarer medium, so when a rarer medium is there will be no phase difference of pi in the reflected beam. This must be remembered. We'll look at some questions where this phenomena is utilized. So if we return back to our initial system, I'll just quickly explain what happens in thin films. So consider this thin film which I have given to be having a thickness t and a refractive index, let's say mu. Okay, now I have a light ray AB coming in. It gets reflected, some part of it gets reflected at the point B along BR1. Okay, this is the first reflected light. Now some part of it goes in, which is refracted. Now at this point C also, some of it will get reflected back into the system, some will get transmitted. Now this reflected part will go here, reach the point D, some of it will be transmitted while some will be reflected back, and this will go on. Okay, now what really happens is there is a interference between these two, or the interference between the reflected lights, and there is an interference between the transmitted lights. Okay, so how do you calculate these things? We can do it for the reflected system, which is more prominent. So let's talk about the reflected system, and the basic principle is just the same for the transmitted as well. So for the reflected system, what do I have? I have to calculate to calculate interference, I need to calculate the path difference between BR1, BR1 and DR2. Okay, and how do I calculate it? I make this 90 perpendicular line here. Okay, and I see that this is my extra distance that is there between the two. I find that this distance, which I write as x, can be written as 2 mu into thickness into cos of r. This you can check by simple geometrical construction. Okay, now you know that due to reflection from the surface of a denser medium, it involves an additional phase difference of pi. Therefore, the exact path difference between BR1 and DR2 is, so what is the path difference? Delta is equal to x prime is equal to 2 mu t cos r minus lambda by 2. Okay, now for we know that the maxima or constructive interference occurs when path difference between the light waves is equal to n lambda. Okay, so the condition for maxima was n lambda is equal to your path difference. If I just equate these two, I can easily get that 2 mu t cos r is equal to n lambda plus lambda by 2. Okay, so this implies that the bright film will appear if 2 mu t cos r is equal to 2n plus 1 lambda by 2. So this can be easily written as 2n plus 1 to lambda by 2, where n is equal to 0, 1, 2. So what you see is at odd values of lambda by 2, you are getting bright fringes. What about the dark fringes? So this was the case for bright. What is the case for dark fringes? Now the path difference must be an odd multiple of lambda by 2. So my net path difference that I wrote there is the same thing, 2 mu t cos r minus lambda by 2. This is equal to the odd multiples of lambda by 2. Okay, so this just implies that for destructive interference or for dark fringes, I'll get 2 mu t cos r equal to n lambda. Next, let's talk about diffraction of light. So the deviation of light from its rectilinear propagation tendency is defined as the diffraction of light. What happens here is the light bends from sharp edges of an opaque object or apertures. So diffraction was discovered by Grimaldi and was theoretically explained by Fresnel. And you should note that diffraction depends on two factors. One is the size of the obstacle or aperture, okay, and the second is the wavelength of the wave. So what is the condition for diffraction? Diffraction will occur when lambda is similar to the size, or a by lambda is similar to 1. So let's see what really happens in diffraction. So before doing that, there are two types of diffraction. So before starting that, I'll tell you about them. There is the Fresnel diffraction and there is the Fraunhofer diffraction. So in Fresnel diffraction, the source or screen or both are at finite distance from diffracting device, which is the obstacle or the aperture. Okay, this is the obstacle, this is the aperture. And the Fraunhofer diffraction is a particular limiting case of Fresnel diffraction, in which case both source and screen are at effectively infinite distance from the diffracting device. Next, let's take a look at the single slit diffraction. So what you have is a single slit AB, okay, and a plane wavefront arrives at AB. So when this plane wave rate is incident on this slit AB with a width small a, each point each point that is there on this slit will act as uh, a point of disturbance and will produce secondary wavelets from it. So let these be the points on AB. So all these will produce these secondary wavelets. Okay. Now what do I have? Uh, if I have a screen at some distance, and there is some point P at which I want to get the minima. Okay. In order to get the minima, what do I do is, first of all, I split this into two parts. Split into two parts. The first part having a length a by 2, the second also having a length a by 2. And why I do this will become apparent or very clear. Sorry, will become very clear now. So if you look closely here, and if you couple, let's say this point to the midpoint, the second point to the second point below this, the third point to the third point below this, then what you see is you are able to couple all the points really giving rise to secondary wavelets on the upper half to the points on the lower half by a relation where each is at a distance of d by 2 from or a by 2 from each other. So each thing that I've coupled, this to the center, similarly this point to the last point, each is at a distance of d by 2. Okay, with this in your mind, uh, let's see what is the part difference between these two. So to find the part difference, I make this angle to be 90, and then this is my angle theta, and for me to get a minima at some point P, what do I have? I have that this part difference is nothing but lambda by 2 or multiples of lambda by 2, and I already know that this distance between these 2 points is equal to a by 2. So what will I have? I have that sine theta is nothing but lambda by 2 divided by a by 2, or I can easily write this as lambda by a. So my sine theta is equal to lambda by a for, let's say, this point and the central point. Similarly, for the second point and the second point below the center, I have the same relation, that sine theta is equal to for sine theta is equal to lambda by a. I get destructive interference there. Okay. With this in mind, I can easily generalize this formula to sine theta for the nth minima is similar to theta for the nth minima is nothing but n times lambda by a. Here the theta n is supposed to be small. So let's go to the prominent diagram for the single slit. It's the one that is given to you. Your source S is taken. A lens is used to produce your straight waveform or plane waveform. It comes and arrives at AB. You have a screen at some distance which is equal to capital D. The slit width is given by small a, and the same angle that I talked to you about is given by theta n. Now I'll just tell you about what happens. So when the path difference between the secondary wavelets coming from A and B is n lambda, so if the path difference is equal to n lambda or 2n into lambda by 2 or even multiples of lambda by 2, I see that minima occurs. Okay. For minima, I have the condition. For minima, here I have the condition which says that A into sine theta n is equal to 2n times lambda by 2, where n is equal to 1, 2, 3 and so on. This is actually n lambda. So A sine theta n is nothing but n lambda. This is the case for your minima. Now when the path difference between the secondary wavelets coming from A and B is 2n plus 1 lambda by 2. So the path difference between the wavelets from A and B is 2n plus 1 lambda by 2 or multiples of lambda by 2. Then I have the maximum condition which says I have the maxima condition which says that A sine theta n is nothing but 2n plus 1 lambda by 2. Okay, this is the condition for maxima. Here n is equal to again 1, 2, 3 and so on. So from here you can see that n is equal to 1 is the first maxima, and n is equal to 2 is equal to the second maxima. So this should be quite clear. What will you actually get on the screen? There will, in alternate order, there will be minimas and maximas occurring on both sides of the central maxima. So for nth minima, let's talk about the nth minima. I have written first of all these things down for you to note. Now for nth minima, what do I have? Let's talk about intensity later. For nth minima, I have that if distance of the nth minima from central maxima is xn, okay, if the distance is equal to xn and the distance of slit width from screen is equal to d, okay, with width of screen being equal to a, then the path difference which was given by a sine theta, okay, as we already said that for minima you have even multiples of lambda by 2. That implies you can easily say that for nth minima you have sine theta n is equal to n lambda by a, okay. And if you just consider, let's say this is your point O, this is your screen in front of you at a distance d, okay, theta n, this is theta n, this is p prime, this is p double prime, this is some point p at a distance of d, okay. With this in your hand, you can easily see in the triangle POP prime that tan theta n is equal to xn by d. If theta n is small, sin theta n is similar to tan theta n is similar to theta n. That implies my xn can be written as n lambda d by a. That implies theta n is nothing but xn by d. It is nothing but n lambda by a. So first minima occurs on both sides of the central maxima. For first minima, what do I have? First minima, I have that my distance x is equal to d into lambda by a. and theta is equal to x by d is equal to lambda by a. Okay, you can easily get the linear width of central maxima. So what is the linear width of central maxima? Linear central maxima, this will give me 2 times x or equal to 2d lambda by a. This is the only thing that I think you should remember from here. I've shown you the intensity curves right over here. The intensity curves are shown here. You can easily see that at the center there is a bright fringe, and then uh, the intensity goes down as you go further away from the center. Here also you can easily find the fringe width that is there, but more importantly I want you to talk to you about the intensity, how it varies. So the intensity of maxima in a Fraunhofer's diffraction is given by the formula 2 divided by 2n plus 1 into pi whole square into I naught, where I naught is the intensity of central maxima and n is the order of the maxima. So you can use this formula to get the intensity of uh, every other maxima that you get. Okay, so you should always remember that diffraction occurs in slit is always diffraction occurring in slit is always Fraunhofer diffraction, as a diffraction pattern obtained from the cracks between the fingers when viewed uh, a distant tube light, and in a Young's double slit experiment you have Fraunhofer refractions. Let's solve another question. The angular width of the central maximum in a single slit diffraction pattern is 60 degree. The width of the slit is 1 micrometer. The slit is illuminated by monochromatic plane waves. If another slit of same width is made near it, Young's fringes can be observed on the screen placed at a distance 50 cm from the slits. So you had a slit over here, you placed another slit. This was 50 cm. This was the screen. Okay, and then first of all, what all is given to you? They've also said the observed fringe width is 1 centimeter. You are supposed to find the slit separation distance. So you are supposed to find this distance. Let's say it is d prime. Okay, and let me call this as d. So first of all, in diffraction, you should know that the angular width of the central maximum is given to be 60 degrees. So if your central maximum was something like this, if this entire thing is 60 degrees, then this angle is 30 degrees, okay, on one of the sides. So for diffraction you have that d into sine of 30 is equal to lambda, which is the where n is equal to 1. This is the first minima. So at this point the first minima will occur because your central maxima is ending there. Okay, so you have the first minima at this point. Now this implies that lambda can be written as b by 2. So I'll just first note this down. Next, now we consider when the Young's fringe width has to be included. Okay, so I've denoted d prime to be the separation between the two slits. Okay, so my fringe width for a Young's double slit experiment is what? It is lambda d divided by d prime. Okay, with this in mind, we can easily write, because you have been given that the fringe width is 1 centimeter. So 10 to the power minus 2 is equal to what is the lambda that is given to you? lambda is okay, so instead of lambda you can just use that lambda is equal to d by 2. So I have d by 2 into d by d prime. This is what I need to solve. I already have the values of some of them. So the value of d small d has been given to me as 1 micrometer. So I have 1 micrometer here, which is 10 to the power minus 6 into, now d is 50 to centimeter, 15 to 10 to the power minus 2. You have a 2 here, and then you have a d prime. Just taking the d prime on the left side, I can easily write that d prime is nothing but 25 micrometer. Let's talk about resolving power. So a large number of images are formed as a consequence of light diffraction from a source. If two sources are separated such that their central maxima do not overlap, then their images can be distinguished and then they are said to be resolved. Okay, and the ability of the optical instrument to do this thing will be measured in terms of its resolving power. There can be a linear resolving power or there can be an angular resolving power. Let's talk about the microscope. So in reference to a microscope, the minimum distance between two lines at which they are just distinct is called the resolving limit, and its reciprocal is known as the resolving power. So your resolving limit is given by lambda by 2 mu sine theta, and your resolving power is 2 mu sine theta by lambda. So resolving power is 2 mu sine theta by lambda. Note that lambda is the wavelength of light used to illuminate the object. Mu is the refractive index of the medium between the object and the objective, and theta is the half angle of the cone of light from the point object. So this is your objective lens. Let's say this is your object, and theta is this half angle. Okay, so you can easily see that your resolving power is the inverse. So always remember this, resolving power is the inverse of the minimum distance between two lines, which can be easily known to be distinct. So it's the inverse of your resolving limit. You should next look at the telescope. So the smallest angular separation d theta, the smallest angular separation d theta between two distant objects whose images are separated in the telescope is known as the resolving limit. It will be known as the resolving limit, and the reciprocal of this will be given by the resolving power. Okay, so resolving limit will turn out to be 1.22 times lambda by a, and the resolving power is 1 by the resolving limit, which is nothing but a by 1.22 lambda. Okay, where a is the aperture of the objective. These formulas will be very handy when you try to attempt the questions. Let's look at another question. The value of numerical aperture of the objective lens of a microscope is 1.25. If light of wavelength 5000 angstrom is used, the minimum separation between 2 points to be seen as distinct will be. Now you should first of all note what numerical aperture is. It's nothing but mu into sine theta. Okay. Now I need to find the distance. So I already have the formula for this. It is 1.22 lambda time divided by 2 mu sine theta, which is nothing but 1.22 lambda times 2 times numerical aperture. Okay. First of all, you should definitely note this down. Nothing but 1.22 into 5000 angstroms divided by 2 into 1.25, nothing but 0.24 micrometer. Next is a simple formula based question. Calculate the limit of resolution of a telescope objective having a diameter of 200 centimeter if it has to detect light of the wavelength 500 nanometer coming from a star. So I have my theta nothing but 1.22 lambda divided by d, which is equal to 1.22 into 500 into 10 to the power minus 9 divided by 2 is equal to 305 into 10 to the power minus 9 radians. So in the previous section we looked at the phenomena of interference and diffraction, but we did not see whether this wave motion is longitudinal or transverse. So the phenomena of polarization confirms that light wave is a transverse wave. Okay, so polarization will do this. So let's talk about polarization. To begin with, we need to look at what unpolarized light is. So an ordinary beam of light will consist of large number of waves emitted by atoms of the light source. Now each atom will produce a wave with its own orientation of the electrical field. Okay, so there will be different orientations of the electrical field vector. So the vibrations of E are equally probable in all the directions. Equally probable in all directions. Okay, so I know that this is the electromagnetic wave. So the electromagnetic wave will be a superposition of waves produced by the individual atomic sources, and it will be known as your unpolarized light. So I've given you what the unpolarized actually means. So you can easily see that there are vibrations of the electrical field in all the directions. Uh, in this unpolarized light, you should note that the vibration of the electric field vector E is happening symmetrically in all possible directions in a plane which is perpendicular to the direction of propagation of light. Okay, so if my light is going in the x direction, then the electrical field is propagating in the y direction and in the z directions. Okay, this is coming out of the plane or into the plane. So these are the things that you should note from here. Unpolarized light will have no specific direction of vibrations. Okay, let's talk about polarization. What happens in polarization? So the phenomena of restricting the vibration of light or the electric field vector E in a particular direction perpendicular to the direction of motion of the wave is known as the polarization of light. So what you should take back from this is, in polarized light, the vibration of the electrical vector will occur in a plane perpendicular to the direction of propagation of light, and it will be confined to a single direction in the plane. Okay, it will not be symmetrical. So after polarization, vibrations become asymmetrical. Vibrations will become asymmetrical. We'll just talk about some basic phenomena or basic terms that are used while talking about polarization. So the first is the plane of polarization and the plane of vibration. So the plane in which vibrations of light vector and the direction of propagation lie is known as the plane of vibration. Okay, a plane normal to the plane of vibration and in which no vibration takes place is known as the plane of polarization. So I've given to you the plane of polarization here. Okay, and this ABCD is your plane of vibrations. Note that your direction of propagation is common to both the planes. With this in mind, we'll just look at methods to polarize light, which are important from the examination point of view. So the first way is by polarization by reflection. So when a beam of ordinary light is reflected from a surface, which I've shown you here, so ordinary light means unpolarized light. When it is reflected from a surface, the reflected light is partially polarized. Okay, the reflected partially polarized, and the degree of polarization of the polarized light in the reflected beam is greatest when it is incident at an angle called polarizing angle or Brewster's angle. Okay, so you see that it is going from a lighter medium to a denser medium. Okay, we'll define what these things are. So theta p that I've given to you here, theta p is known as the polarizing angle. which is nothing but the angle of incidence at which the reflected light is completely plane polarized. I've given you a case of complete plane polarization. So unpolarized light comes in, and this is your surface. After hitting, it gets reflected. Now if you look in the reflected parts, what is there? There are components which are only coming out of the plane, and in the refracted part you have components which are in the plane. Okay, so this should be noted down. Next is the Brewster's law. What does it say? So when unpolarized light strikes at a polarizing angle which is equal to theta p, okay, on an interface separating a rare medium from a denser medium of refractive index mu, such that mu is equal to tan theta p, then the reflected light, which is light in the rare medium, is completely polarized. Okay, so you have a completely polarized light when mu is equal to tan of theta p. Also at this point, the reflected and the refracted rays are normal to each other. So this should be noted. So R and T waves are to each other. I'll just call them rays here. So reflected and transmitted rays are perpendicular to each other, or instead of reflected, we can easily write this to be reflected and transmitted. Okay, so the law states that the tangent of the polarizing angle of incidence of a transparent medium is equal to its refractive index. So you should note from here something which is theta p plus theta r is equal to 90 degree. This comes out of the simple Snell's law. Next, let's look at the law of Malus. So this law states that when a completely plane polarized light beam is incident on an analyzer, then the intensity of the emergent light varies as the square of cosine of the angle between the planes of transmission of the analyzer and the polarizer. So an analyzer is nothing but a polarizer again. So I'll try to explain to you these things very quickly. Let this be one of the polarizers. Now what is a polarizer? A polarizer is a device which will have a preferred axis or a preferred plane. It will have a preferred plane, let's say this plane. Okay, it will have a preferred plane of uh, polarizing ability. What happens is, if a light beam or a light ray passes through it, now the light ray can have polarized, can be polarized or unpolarized, it does not matter. When it passes through the polarizer, it will only allow vibrations in its preferred axis of polarization to pass through. It will block all the other directions. So if there are directions something like this or perpendicular to it, it will just block them out. It will not allow them to pass. So what comes out of this is light in the preferred plane of the polarizer. Now what happens is, if my second polarizer is again having the same axis, then when these pass through, they will not be blocked, they will easily come out. But what happens if my polarizer, next polarizer is at a angle to the first one? Now if this is at an angle, then this polarizer will allow vibrations in this axis to pass through. Okay, it will not allow these vibrations to pass through. So when these vibrations of the electrical fields reach this polarizer, okay, we'll use the simple split. We will split these into the simple vectors that are there. So my analyzer is basically the last polarizer that will be used. So there is something known as the plane of analyzer. So that plane of analyzer is nothing but this plane. You have the plane of the polarizer. The plane of polarizer was this plane. Okay, the plane in which the light is coming in. So what will happen is, the components of the amplitude which are parallel to the analyzer's axis will be allowed to pass. The ones that are perpendicular to this axis, okay, they will not be allowed to pass. So they will be blocked. So the component A sine theta will be blocked. This means that my intensity that comes out of a polarizer will be equal to the I naught times cos square theta, where I naught was the intensity of the light that is coming into that polarizer. Okay, this will be evident when you look at some problems. The first thing that you should notice, if you have initially some unpolarized light and you incident it on a polarizer, then you will get the average value of I naught cos square theta. The average value of cos square theta is equal to half. So when you throw in some unpolarized light, you will get the emergent light to be equal to I naught by 2. Okay, and this will be polarized in the direction of the polarizer. Let's look at a question. Unpolarized light of intensity I passes through an ideal polarizer A. Another identical polarizer B is placed behind A, which I have done in the situation 1. The intensity of light beyond B is found to be I by 2. Now another identical polarizer C is placed between A and B. The intensity beyond B is now found to be I by 8. You are supposed to find the angle between the polarizers A and C. Let's see what is happening. You are throwing in an intensity light of intensity I which is unpolarized. So the first concept that you'll use is whenever an unpolarized light goes into any polarizer, its value will become half of its original value. Okay, so we see that the value here is I naught by 2 or I by 2, and here also it's I by 2. Okay, next, in the first case it's written that the value emerging out of B is equal to I by 2. Now if I use the formula of intensity for a polarizer at the B, so my final or I final is equal to I entering into cos square theta, if I can write it in this form. And that implies I can write this as my I final is I by 2, the I intensity that is entering is also I by 2, and is cos square theta, where theta is the angle between the polarizing planes of A and B. This equation tells me that cos square theta is equal to 1 or cos theta is equal to 1 or theta is equal to 0 degrees. So the angle between these is 0 and A and B are parallel. So this is the first conclusion that you draw. A is parallel to B, which means that their axis, the polarizing axis, is parallel. Next we look at the other case. So we already know that the value is I by 2 here. Now it's given that the value finally is equal to I by 8. Now if I need to find what is the value of intensity here. So first of all, let's take the AC junction, or the action of the polarizer C when light is coming from A. So you have, let me call it I emerging from C is equal to I entering into C. What is the intensity entering? It is I by 2. This is this value into cos square theta. Let's say this is theta AC, theta between A and C. Okay. Now between the surface B and C, I have the intensity coming out of B, which is I by 8, is equal to the intensity entering into B, which is IC, into cos square theta into BC. Now we already know from the first case that A and B are parallel. So this theta BC is nothing but theta AC again. Okay. With these two equations, we need to solve everything else down. So what will we do? We will substitute the value of IC from here into this equation. So I can write I by 8 is equal to I by 2 into cos 4 theta AC. Okay, or cos 4 theta AC turns out to be how much? It turns out to be 1 by 4. So cos 4 theta AC is equal to 1 by 4, or cos theta turns out to be how much? Is equal to 1 by root 2. If cos theta is 1 by root 2, I can easily write that theta is equal to 45 degrees, which is one of the choices that is given to us. Let's solve a question. Assuming human pupil to have a radius of 0.25 centimeter and a comfortable viewing distance of 25 centimeter, the minimum separation between the two objects that human eye can resolve at 500 nanometer wavelength is given by which of these? Okay. In order to solve this, I have several things at hand. First of all, let's tell you what this actually means. So let there be 2 points. Point 1 is here, A is here, B is here, and we need to find the distance between them that we can resolve. Let me call that as d naught. Okay, and it's given that there is a comfortable viewing distance of d. Let's say d1. Here d1 is given to you as 25 centimeter. You are supposed to find d naught. Okay, and now we already know that we already know the formula for the resolving power of a length microscope as well, or a telescope for that matter. So we already know the resolving power of a telescope. Now I have a theta here, so I can find the angular separation between them using this. How is that so? So tan theta is similar to theta, where if theta is small, so theta can be written as d naught by d1, and this is nothing but 1.22 times lambda by d. Okay, because your eye is acting like a small telescope if you want to take it in that way. So 1.22 lambda by d. So I can easily find that my d naught is nothing but 1.22 lambda by d into d1. If I just substitute the values, 1.22 into lambda is given to me as 500 nanometer. Okay, and then your d1 is 25 centimeter, so that is 25 into 10 to the power minus 2. If you divide the entire thing, divide by 0.5 into 10 to the power, because you have been given that the radius is this much. Okay, with this in mind, just by calculating this, I can easily find that this is equal to Now let's look at a question. Consider a tank made of glass with a thick bottom. It is filled with a liquid of refractive index mu. A student finds that irrespective of what the incident angle I is for a beam of light entering the liquid, the light reflected from the liquid glass interface is never completely polarized. For this to happen, the minimum value of mu is given by what? So in this question again, I'll try to bring in some new concepts that you should remember. First of all, I've made the glass liquid air interface for you. Okay, this is your angle of incidence that is given to you. Uh, the refractive index for this is mu, for this is 1.5, for this is equal to 1. Now let me just briefly tell you first about what polarizing angle and critical angles are. So critical angle is nothing but uh, critical angle, and let's look at another question. Consider a tank made of glass with a thick bottom. It is filled with a liquid of refractive index mu. A student finds that irrespective of what the incident angle is for a beam of light entering the liquid, the light reflected from the liquid glass interface is never completely polarized. For this to happen, the minimum value of mu is what? Okay. So first of all, I've shown you the different interfaces: glass liquid interface, liquid air interface. There is air on top, then liquid in the center, glass at the bottom. Glass has a refractive index 1.5. This has a refractive index mu, and air has a refractive index of 1. In order to do this question, you should remember what polarizing angle IP is and what a critical angle is. Okay, you should what is let me just revise what this critical angle means? So when the angle of incidence of a travel of a ray traveling from a dense medium to a rare medium is greater than critical angle, then no refraction occurs. You read about this in the theory of TIR also. Okay, so whenever angle of incidence is greater than the critical angle, that implies no refraction occurs. That implies only reflection occurs. Okay, now you should always note that your critical angle IC is always less than your polarizing or your Brewster angle IB. This is something that you should definitely note. Okay, now let's proceed with the question. So my critical angle, let's say sine of my critical angle IC is equal to the refractive index of the rarer medium by refractive index of the denser medium is equal to, let's say, n21 or mu21. Okay, now I know that my critical angle is less than my Brewster's angle or my polarizing angle IB. Thus I can write that sine of IC is less than sine of IB or IP. You can write the Brewster's angle as this. Okay, now I can write that for the air to liquid interface, sine 90 into 1 is equal to mu into sine C, or sine of IC is equal to 1 by mu. This is for the liquid and air interface. Okay, similarly from the Brewster's law, I know that tan of IB is nothing but 1.5 by mu. This happens at the second interface, glass liquid interface. Okay, now because sine IC is less than sine IB, I can write that 1 by mu is less than 1.5 divided by root over mu square plus 1.5 whole square. That implies mu is less than 3 by root 5.